Hello everyone, it's Andy, the BPD Warrior. Sorry I haven't made a video in a while, but I actually haven't been feeling very good. I've been struggling with a little bit of depression, and my hysterectomy hasn't been that great. I actually developed an infection and was in the hospital for a few days, so you can understand why I haven't been able to make a video. But I was really pressed to make a video today after reading about Donald Trump's comments about PTSD. If you haven't seen them, which you have to be hiding under a rock if you haven't, but what he said was that some people go to war and see horrible, atrocious things and can't handle it, referring to people with PTSD. And a lot of people are really divided on what this is, if there's a hidden meaning behind it. And I think what he was implying is that people with PTSD are weak. Well, that's really inaccurate. PTSD doesn't have anything to do with being weak or strong, and it doesn't deal with whether you can handle it or not. It's the brain's fight or flight reaction working its way out. It's what happens with trauma, and it physically changes the brain. So I thought I would share about my experience with living with PTSD. I was not a veteran, and though my situation may seem ridiculous that I have PTSD from it, just hearing about it, but it depends on the person, and I'm obviously a hypersensitive person as is, and so please don't belittle my story, even if it's not as exciting or death-defying as some veterans go through, but that doesn't demean my experience. When I was 13, that's when I first started struggling with mental illness. I had a blog, and this was before we called them blogs. This was I called an online journal, because I'm really old school internet. This was back in 1999. I was 13 and I had an online journal, and I shared the very exciting thoughts of a teenage girl, boys and school and that sort of thing. Well, as the winter continued on, I became depressed for the first time in my life, and I had never experienced depression. I was really sad and crying a lot, and eventually I became suicidal. And I actually shared this on my online journal because I'm a very open person, obviously, since I talk about what I've been going through with mental health publicly. And instead of being supported on my blog, I was actually cyberbullied by a group of 4 girls that went to my high school. They left anonymous messages on my blog while being friends with me in real life, friends. Some of the messages said things like, "You're making up your depression for attention. If you were really depressed, you would kill yourself, and the world would be better off if you were dead." I talked to my mom about it eventually, and she said that we'd get me into therapy, and we never did. Part of it was because of money. At the time, insurance didn't have to cover mental health, and ours did not. And the other part of it, my mom revealed years later, was that she thought I was over it. Well, I'm obviously not. One of the symptoms I suffer from is I have nightmares. Luckily, not very frequently anymore. They've kind of lessened as years have gone on. But when I have these nightmares, the next day I can never get back to my emotional baseline. I am fucked. I struggle all day if I have a nightmare. I have a recurring bad dream or nightmare that I'm the bad kid in school. And all of my favorite teachers hate me, and I mean, I was like a straight A student and a total suck up to the teachers, and so it's the exact opposite of what happened in school. But so if I have when I have this reoccurring nightmare, when I wake up the next day, I often can't remember whether I graduated high school. I'll think I need to go back to school and take extra classes. I sometimes, if it's bad enough, I will actually think I am in high school and start getting ready for the bus, because that's how badly it affects me. I was also raped a few years ago, which is another trauma I experienced, and another symptom I have is flashbacks. I don't have them very often, and occasionally I'll have them during sex, where I suddenly feel like I think that I'm being attacked and being raped again. So PTSD is really severe. Mine is not as severe as some other people's, but it really affects your brain, and it does physically change the structure of your brain. But it's not an issue of being able to handle it or not. It's fight or flight. It's the brain's reaction to what happens. And people are really divided on what he said, because some people are saying it was taken out of context. I've read multiple articles that it was about that, but I can't find an article that isn't just totally right-wing bullshit. And I don't really like to talk politics. Politics is actually kind of triggering for me. It makes my BPD symptoms really extreme. But as you can imagine, if you have black or white thinking, it's really hard to, talk to people and hear different sides when you don't necessarily agree with everything someone says. And so I was really affected by what he said, and it really infuriates me that he said it, because what he said is not just ignorant, but it's dangerous. Every day, 22 veterans, average, commit suicide. So we need to be doing all we can to not only help the veterans, but tell them it's okay to get help. A lot of people, including myself, because of the events I went through in high school, the cyberbullying, I actually refused to talk about my mental illness, and for 10 years didn't get help due to the stigma. It was a huge part of my life. And so when you it doesn't matter what exactly he said, because he did not say that people with PTSD are weak, but he said that some people are strong, and he also said that some people can't handle it. Which, if you take that to mean that he's whether he said people are weak or not, if you take that and hear him and you think he is saying people with PTSD are weak, like a lot of people are. I mean, if you go on Twitter, you can see all the vets and non-vets, people living with PTSD, saying, this affects me, this makes me feel bad because I am not weak. It just adds to the stigma. There's already so much stigma for mental illness, and when you make comments that belittle what someone is going through, they're less likely to get help. I know I didn't get help for a decade until I almost died in a suicide attempt. So it just really makes me mad that he said that, and it makes me mad that people are defending him and trying to pick apart his words and are saying, well, it was taken out of context and the liberal media is blowing it out of proportion. And the fact is, what he said was ignorant and very dangerous. because we need to let people know that it's okay to have a mental health problem and it's okay to get help, instead of making them feel like they're weak or there's something wrong with them for having one. And I think that's what people aren't getting, is they think I'm just bashing Trump. But the problem is that it promotes stigma, and we need to not do that. Obviously, we need to. This is why I talk so much about mental illness, and why I go out there and share my story, because the stigma is very real, and a lot of people can't share their story because of their job or their church or just whatever, and they feel like, I mean, some jobs, I was reading someone say that their job actually had in their employment contract that your job could be terminated if you had a mental illness. So it's a big deal to belittle someone with a mental illness, or say that they're not strong. And, strength is something that's really valued in the military, obviously. And when you say that if you make someone feel weaker because they have a mental illness from trauma of any sort, even my little cyberbullying thing, or whether it's because of the atrocities of war, you really are hurting people, and you're making them less likely to talk about their issues, which leads to suicide. That's exactly what happened to me. I hid my secret mental health problems for a decade, and then finally it all came to a head, and I attempted to kill myself, and I almost did. It was a very close call. My liver failed, and I was transferred from one hospital to another to get a liver transplant. But by some miracle, my liver came back on. So I don't usually like to share my political view, because I don't like talking politics, because it really triggers me, as I said. It gets me all BPD-like. But it really, really pisses me off what he said, and the fact that people are defending him and talking about us being hypersensitive, and how the liberal media blowing it out of proportion. But it needs to be bigger than it already is, because this is a serious issue. If this man is going to run our country, God forbid, he can't be saying shit like that. That hurts people. It really does. It makes the stigma so much more intense than it already is. God, I'm so angry about this right now. I'm glad that I have a platform to share my story, and at least hopefully help someone, because whether he said it or not, if you cannot tell people that PTSD is because you're weak. It has nothing to do with weakness or strength. It's actually part of the brain. It's the way the brain handles a traumatic event, regardless of what that event was. So that's my opinion on what Donald Trump said, and I have been getting so much backlash on Facebook for my comments, and people telling me I'm being hypersensitive, and one guy even telling me when I said I have PTSD, he said congrats, so I had to block him. But that's what I have to say about Trump's comments. So that's all for today. Thanks, BPD warriors. Keep on fighting, and make sure you go to the polls November, whatever date it is, in November, and make sure this man is not elected in office. At least that's my opinion. But things like that type of language, that comment, is very dangerous, and we need to end stigma, not promote it. You guys have a good night. Thanks.